Okay, let's get started today. We're going to be looking at finishing, actually, the story of Samson. A couple of the things that I just didn't have time to finish in the life of Samson, and then we're going to move on to the story of Ruth today. Meadow, since you're our only lady in here. Anyway, so we'll be taking the story of Ruth after this. So first, we need to finish the story of Samson. We were looking at 8 major victories that Samson brought about for the children of Israel against the Philistines. The lion, well, that wasn't against the Philistines. 8 demonstrations of Samson's strength, I guess. The first is the lion incident. Then the slaying of the 30 Philistines. He used burning fox tails. The Bible mentions right after that a great slaughter. And then he's brought down off the rock Edom, and he kills 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. He carried off an entire city gate. He broke the strings, the rope, the pin, and the web in which his hair was woven. That's all with Delilah. And then pulling down the Philistine temple and killing more at his death than he did all of his life. So about 3,000 people at least there, right there at his death. All right, so Samson, man chosen of God. God used him because he'd built up so many good things, right? That God continued to use him even when he stumbled once in a while. That's not true. God used him in spite of his failures, not because of his many great achievements. Yes, he's listed in the Hall of Faith, Hebrews chapter 11. Can anybody remember why you think, or what are some possible reasons why he showed great faith there? Mm-hmm.
Well, took faith when he went up against 1,000.
Took faith in a number of those instances, took great faith. If a lion comes roaring at you, doesn't matter whether you have faith or not, right? There it just depends upon God, but no, he demonstrates great faith on numerous occasions. All right, let me point out a couple things about Samson, comparing him to Israel, but before we do that, let's pray and we'll get started. Thank you, Lord, for this day. Help us to take your word and to understand it literally, understand it exactly the way that you want us to, and I pray that you'd open our minds to understand your word. Bless our day. Bless all the needs that we have. Pray that you'll meet those needs. In Jesus' name, amen. Let me compare Samson to Israel. It's really interesting, I think, that at this time period, as bad as Samson was at times and where he went away from the Lord, Israel is very similar in they also departed from the Lord, and they also continued to see many of God's blessings. By the way, we do the same thing. We see many of God's blessings even when we backslide and even when we wander away from the Lord. So in a lot of ways, I want to point out 7 different ways that Samson is kind of similar. He is the prototype in a way of Israel. This is typical of what Israel was like, and this is the way Samson was as well. First of all, Samson was chosen before birth. And the children of Israel, they were chosen by simply being born into a family. They were chosen before birth. God's plan for his life was revealed before his birth. Children of Israel thought that they were special, and they come to find out that when they sinned, God punished them the same way he punished the heathen. Romans chapter 2 talks about how the children of Israel think that they're special. And they think that they are above being punished by God for sin. No. Just because you're born into the family doesn't mean that you have special privilege to get away with sin. They were chosen before birth, so was Samson. Second, Samson, while he was consecrated, he had power over his enemies. While he was consecrated, he had power over his enemies. When he prayed to God, God heard him and God delivered him. Same with the children of Israel. If my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face, turn to me, then will I hear from heaven So the children of Israel, when they followed God, God gave them victory over all their enemies. Of course, you know the reverse, the flip side of that is true also. That when Samson, this is the next thing, when Samson turned his back upon the Lord, when Samson went away from God, God let him be punished, just like anybody else. Samson suffered an early death, suffered a lot of problems, not because he was special, because he was like everybody else. He was a sinner. Okay, so give you a couple other things then. We see that God's strength delivered him from his enemies. God's strength delivered him from his enemies. Children of Israel were the same way. 6 times in the book of Judges, the Bible says that God came upon him, or his strength came upon Samson. 6 times. So the strength of the Lord came upon him, and it came on the children of Israel as well. When they cried out to the Lord, there's many great stories of the children of Israel going to battle and literally doing almost nothing, just showing up, and God wrought the victory. I love to think of those stories. One time God throws hail, actually several times, he throws hailstones out of the sky and beats down the enemy. Sometimes he just created a big noise, and the enemy runs in fear and kills each other off. That happens on numerous occasions. Sometimes they go to battle, or the children of Israel go to battle, and the enemy sees blood down, or red down in the valley, the sunrise, and they think it's blood, and they rush down to the battle, and of course they're off their normal procedure of battle, and the children of Israel get a great victory. There's many times when God gave them victory simply for being there and showing up. Same with Samson. Next, when God's patience ran out, it left Samson to judgment. When God's patience ran out, it left Samson to judgment. Did you know that God let Samson pretty much destroy his own life? Same thing with the children of Israel. When God's patience ran out, he left him to judgment. So God did that with the children of Israel as well. The point, I hope you get the point. God deals with sin the same way with the children of Israel as he did with Samson, as he does with us. I think he judges us more harshly because, that principle in the Bible, to whom much is given, much is required. I believe he judges more harshly upon his own people than he does the heathens who don't know. I'm reminded of the verse in the book of Acts, I believe it's chapter 18. The times of this ignorance God winked at. God gives more extended mercy to those who have never had an opportunity to hear the gospel than he does for those who... So anyway, the point is that you sin, you're going to get punished. And you treat the Lord lightly, and it's going to come back to get you. And then the last comparison is Israel. You need one more, because I said I had 7, right? Do you have 6? 6. All right, let me give you number 7 then. Samson. Oh, this is 6 for you? Did I miss one? Do you have 5 or 6?
I have 4.
Whoa, nice. All right, I'll give you one more. And you won't have to know all of them anyway. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Yes, I have 7. So, all right, I'm going to give the last one. Samson turned to God at the last. And that's exactly the way the children of Israel will be as well. The Bible tells us that very clear in Romans chapter 11. And, of course, the book of Revelation talks about the 144,000, not Jehovah's Witnesses or anybody else. But it talks about the children of Israel coming back to the Lord at the last. That remnant that will return to God. So Samson is a picture in a lot of ways of Israel. Now let me give you one last section on Samson. Let me as much as we have told you all the terrible things he did, let's now mention a few things that kind of defend his character. We'll turn our back on all the bad things. Okay? Let me just mention a few thoughts. I know your book you're reading brought some of these things out, and I found a few other things. Some arguments defending Samson. The Bible does say in Judges chapter 13 that when he wanted to get married, that was of the Lord. It was of the Lord to punish the Philistines. Remember that marriage that he wanted. So again, we already touched on this, that even though Samson was a rebel and was going against the will of his parents, which is always, especially in the case of Christian parents, always a bad idea, that God was still in this. And for some reason, God allowed this to continue. Even though Samson was clearly in the wrong, God used that to get the Philistines as well. And I think this is just, you can simply explain it by saying this is the sovereignty of God. God intended to use Samson to really hurt the Philistines. And so even though Samson was wrong, God used him. God also used a lot of other wicked people, such as us. God also used wicked nations to accomplish his purpose. Assyria, Babylon. I mean, he uses wicked, all sinners, he uses them to accomplish his will. His marriage is of the Lord. Secondly, he judged Israel for 20 years, meaning that he had knowledge of the law. That was obviously a requirement to be a judge. Now, we think of Samson primarily as a military deliverer, but he was also a judge. He did have ability to judge, to discern. So he judged for 20 years. Third, he never led Israel into idolatry. That's a good thing. Even though he himself had some perverted ways, he never led them directly into idolatry. And that's a good thing. Fourth, he never bragged about the bad things he did. He did brag about killing a lion, right? Made up a nice riddle about that. And then fifth, the Bible never tells us of him mistreating a woman. Now, I know he did lots of other bad things, but that's as far as we'll go with that one. So he didn't mistreat people. Anyway, so those are some pretty simple things, but just for just about 2-3 minutes here, we closed our eyes to the other bad things that he did. Okay, that brings us now to a wonderful story of the story of Ruth. Now remember, I told you earlier in the semester that the story of Ruth falls into somewhere probably the earlier part of the book of Judges. And we see the children of Israel we see the family of Elimelech fleeing to Moab. And so to try to fit this story in somewhere during the time of the Judges, you have to do some work and guessing when they might have gone and why they might have left. There's a couple of possibilities. They definitely, I don't think, would have gone to Moab during the time of the Moabite oppression. That's a pretty fair assumption to make. They also left Bethlehem at a time of famine. Can you think of a time where there was a lack of food during the Judges? Yes?
When the Midianites were in.
Sure. When the Midianites were there, that was the oppression of the Midianites, was that they took the harvest, the food from them. So that's a possibility. Most people put the time of the story of Ruth somewhere earlier in the period of the Judges. But just remember this. What is the main purpose of the book of Ruth? Is it to give us at least one love story in the Bible? I looked at Meadow for that one. She likes, I'm sure, this kind of stuff. Yes? First mention of the kinsman redeemer. Okay, it's not the first. Okay, it's actually, to call it the first mention of it, it had been mentioned in the law. But it's the first story of demonstrating the kinsman redeemer. No question about that. Anybody else? I think there's a bigger purpose even. Meadow?
It gives them the lineage of Christ.
It's the lineage of Christ. And?
There's a picture of Christ.
Yes, oh yes, all of those things are true. I still think there's even another very important purpose.
Maybe salvation for a Gentile?
Absolutely. All very true. You're the last one left. Can you have anything else? You're a senior. Well, most of you are seniors. The lineage of David. Okay, I know he's in the lineage of Christ. I know Christ ultimately is, why the reason David is important is because David is in the lineage of Christ. But the book of Ruth, I believe, is there. Yes, those are all true purposes, and I'm not saying really that the lineage of David even is more important, but at least it's a very, very important reason why the book of Ruth is written. Ruth chapter 4, end of the chapter, gives us the story of the lineage of David. So I think that's another very important purpose in the book of Ruth. And so really to summarize all of that, fitting the book of Ruth into the period of the Judges when there weren't many good things going on. Can we admit that? Right? Not many good things. Judges 17, 18, and 19, not very good. Dan moving to the north, developing their own God, their own religion, their own priesthood, and so on. Not very good. Judges 20 and 21, one of the tribes is almost eliminated because of a horrendous perversion, crime, and so on. And then a lot of other crazy things going on. Well, in the middle of that time period, we see God's mercy and God's providence. I think that more important than anything. God's providence in bringing about his line, developing the family, the line of David, who would eventually become the line of Christ. And of course, many kings, many kings in the southern kingdom of Judah. So it's very important to see, I think, that in the middle of God's judgment, in the middle of this awful cycle of sin, suffering, supplication, and salvation, we see a family that wasn't perfect, but God really worked in their family and brought about this lineage that would lead to a wonderful, wonderful story of King David. So turn to the book of Ruth chapter 1. We're going to take the rest of our day here today looking at the story of Ruth. And I'm just going to take the 4 chapters and I'm going to come at it from the aspect of Ruth as far as our outline goes. There's a little background story, but of course somebody mentioned that the Gentile, the church, I think it was you that said a picture of the church. That's very true. God's mercy to the Gentiles. Ruth was a Gentile. Who's another Gentile that God used here in the Old Testament times? Rahab. Anybody else? Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? I can't. Okay. Well, anyway, I'm trying to think of in the lineage of the Jews, and maybe that's all there is. I thought there was another one at least, but at least Rahab and Ruth. Ruth being a Moabite. Pretty amazing how God brings her not just into the line, but into the family line of Jesus Christ, eventually, of David and of Christ. All right, so let's talk about chapter 1 here. We're going to call this Ruth renouncing. Ruth renouncing. The story starts with the family of Elimelech and Naomi and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, going to the land of Moab because of a famine at Bethlehem. So they lived in Bethlehem. That's a very important place, as we would now know, of course, and as the children of Israel would later know. But the book of Micah chapter 5, verse 2 hadn't been written yet. They had no way of knowing how special Bethlehem was going to be. But they're just living their lives, and there's a famine in the land. Again, what caused the famine? We don't know for sure, but it was either a natural famine, weather and so on, or an unnatural famine, the food being taken from them. And so they leave and they go to Moab. Of course, a bad idea. God was always going to take care of his people. They left Bethlehem. What does Bethlehem mean? House of bread. House of bread. And they leave the house of bread, which didn't have any bread, and they go to Moab. All right, I could give you some names here. Elimelech means God is king. God is king. God is the Lord of my life. And so I'm going to go to a different country with a different God and see if he can take care of me. Not very fitting. Naomi, what does Naomi mean? Sweet or pleasant. Oh, as we would know, she later asked to have her name changed, right? What did she want her name to mean? Bitter. Mara. Call me not Naomi. Don't call me pleasant and sweet, because I'm bitter. Don't call me candy. Call me lemons. Whew. The two boys, Mahlon, Chilion, literally means sick and pining. This is not a very not too good a names for your children there. But anyway, they leave Palestine, go into Moab, Ruth chapter 1 and verses 1 and 2. Well, after time, they obviously lived there for quite some time. The two boys get married to two girls in Moab. Now again, just picture what always happens. You flee your homeland, the place of God's blessing. Even though there's a famine, I believe always God intended people to live through the famine. The children of Israel, Abraham learned that lesson, and others as well. But they live here for some time, and what's going to happen? You're going to absorb the culture of the country. They didn't go out and make Jews of everybody around them. They didn't go telling people about how their God was different. It was the opposite effect. The gods of Moab had their effect, and they intermarry. Intermarriage always is, it seems to always go the direction of the wrong direction, if you will. You don't have God's people influencing the world like they should. You always have the world, it seems, influencing God's people. So the two boys marry, and soon tragedy strikes. The father dies, and then both sons die. Now, in our day, that's not that huge. I mean, it's tough, but it's not life or death situation. In those days, this is life or death. These three ladies have nobody to provide for them. And they will literally starve if they don't have some way of getting food. And it continues to be a problem until Ruth finds the fields of Boaz. So, after this point, there's three sad widows, one old and two younger. And Naomi decides to return to Palestine. Verse 6, then she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her two daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. And Naomi said unto her two daughters-in-law, go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as ye have dealt with the dead, your husbands, and with me. The Lord grant you that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And they said unto her, surely we will return with thee unto thy people. Naomi said, turn again. Why will you go with me? You think I'm going to have more sons? No, of course not. Verse 13, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. She's bitter, all right. And what happens here? Of course, Orpah turns back, and this is the main lesson of chapter 1. Ruth renouncing. Verses 16 and 17, one of the most beautiful answers that you can find. Ruth says, entreat me not to leave thee or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. What did Ruth say here? What is she saying? She's renouncing her old gods. Somehow, and we don't know how, whether it was her husband or her mother-in-law, Ruth became convinced of the God of the Jews. She became convinced. She believed in the God of heaven. Your God is my God. And she also developed a real loyalty to Naomi. For some reason, again, we don't know exactly why. But we see her switching her loyalty of the God, her gods, to the real God. And then her loyalties from her own family, her side of the family, to Naomi's side of the family. And again, we don't know what she might have, we don't know any of the background of Ruth. Can I speculate a little bit? I don't know. I've thought about this, and I wouldn't be one bit surprised if it's true. The Moabite gods, what were they like? Child sacrifice. Chemosh. It's one of the main gods. Real nice gods, right? We don't know her family situation, her brothers and sisters. It's very likely that she had an older sibling who had been given as a child sacrifice. It's very likely that she was afraid of her own gods. And most people are very fearful of their own gods. But there's no way out. And here, Ruth realized that she had a way out. And not just a way out, but she realized that the God of heaven was loving and kind and merciful. This is the nature of the God of heaven, not the nature of the God of the Moabites. So, her loyalties switch. She renounces her gods and takes on the new God. Yes?
I guess that's kind of a tribute to Naomi, too, because we a lot of times put her in a bad light.
Yep.
She seems to be complaining all the time, but she must have been a godly example to her daughters-in-law that
Sure.
Ruth recognized there was something different and wanted to stay.
Sure. Verse 13. It grieveth me much. This is Naomi. Grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. Okay, that says what she's like now, but I think it also kind of shows what she used to be like. That she used to be very pleasant and sweet. And she considered that, even in the midst of the famine in Bethlehem, yes, she followed her husband to Moab, but it seemed that she also had a good attitude about it. And then tragedy strikes and she becomes bitter. But I think that's very, very likely that these two daughters-in-law saw that she was very different. Their whole family was different.
And unlike a lot of people, they never did adopt the gods of the Moabites.
Yes,
A
right.
lot of the people would have, but they didn't,
Sure.
even though they married.
Your God, yeah. Ruth even acknowledged this is your God, no question. Good point. So Ruth renounces. What a wonderful story. Now, they come back, they make their way back to Bethlehem, end of chapter 1. Verse 19, so they too went until they came to Bethlehem. Oh, yeah, they traveled. No, they traveled about 100 miles from Moab to Bethlehem. And it's not necessarily the most comfortable travel there. If you go down from Moab south, you come around the bottom of the Dead Sea and up into the hills and the plateau, the mountains, and you work your way back up to Bethlehem. It's not a pretty little trip. And she's by herself and she's full of grief. I say by herself, without her husband. And they said to her, or all the city of Bethlehem was moved about them, and they said, is this Naomi? She said to them, call me not Naomi, call me Mara. The Lord hath dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi? Wow, she was not a very happy person. All right, so Ruth renouncing. Secondly, chapter 2, we see Ruth reaping. All right, so they come to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. Chapter 1, verse 22 says, Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. And so Naomi sends Ruth out to find grain, to reap grain in the fields. And lo and behold, she happens to come on the field of Boaz. Now, who's Boaz? Any connections? Any relatives? Mm-hmm.
Wasn't he a descendant of Salmon? One of the
Who's Salmon?
One of the two spies who possibly married Rahab.
Okay, actually, you got your possibles mixed up. He was possibly a spy, and he was definitely the husband of Rahab. Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab. And Boaz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse. Boaz is the son of Rahab, and he's the husband of another Gentile who he'll become. Isn't that something? It's pretty crazy. Just right there, son, and then marries a Gentile also.
And that would be another reason why we put this at the beginning.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Another very good reason. Now, how early? Good question. How old is Boaz by this time? We don't know. Indications are that he's older. He could easily be 70, 80 years old already by this time. And he's marrying a young spring chicken. So, okay. And I say that because he's wealthy. He has lots of other relatives who have been married, and this other relative was going to marry Ruth. He was wealthy. There's a lot of fields. Anyway, this guy is a rich man. It probably was not the case that he's, we like to picture this young 30-year-old man just loaded with cash. That's probably not the case. He probably was an older man, because we know what young men are on, right? No, I'm kidding. Loaded with wealth. Right, Rick? So. Sorry? Just loaded. Don't know what to do with it all. All right, so Ruth goes out to glean wheat, and in the providence of God, she picks a field belonging to Boaz, a relative of Elimelech. He's, of course, as I mentioned, the son of Rahab. Boaz sees her working in the field and says, what in the world is this pretty young lady out here working? Now, he's used to seeing people come out to his fields. The Bible made specific, I don't think I wrote that verse down in the law where it says that the widows could come out and glean off the edges of the fields and the corners of the fields. It's easy for me to picture because I grew up on a farm, and if you have a horse-drawn or even tractor-drawn machinery, you're coming up to a corner and you're going to go around and leave the corner. The planter might be easier to get in there than the harvest, or than the harvester. But in these days, they didn't have horse-drawn equipment necessarily. They're out there by hand cutting it down. But they were still told to leave the corners and the edges. Don't go all the way out into the weeds, out in the edges of the trees. Leave those and let the widows come along. Now, who would typically be your widows? Older ladies. Then Boaz, of course, comes out and sees this young, beautiful lady out here working in the field. What's she doing out here? Is she a widow? Who is she? Why is she in my field? This is reserved for widows. And, of course, they say, oh, that's the daughter of Naomi. Let's see here. Verse 4. Behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered him, the Lord bless thee. That's your shalom equivalent. Peace be unto you. The Lord be with you. And they answered him. I think it's really interesting. The Bible can include so many details. That was totally unnecessary. But yet God gives us the details that he walked up to his workers and he said, "The Lord be with you." And they said, "The Lord bless thee too." Verse 5. Then said Boaz unto his servant that was setter of the reapers, "Whose damsel is this?" He didn't call her a widow. He called her "What's this young lady doing out here in my field?" And the servant that was setter of the reapers answered, "It is the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab. And she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and hath continued even from the morning till now, that she tarried a little in the house. Then said Boaz unto Ruth, Hearest thou not, my daughter?" It's the first mention of him speaking to Ruth. "Go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens." All right, I missed another little detail I forgot. Not only they were not supposed to do the edges of the field, but also when a reaper was walking along and they dropped, you picture they're getting handfuls of grain. Stalks of grain are going to fall to the ground. And when they fell, they weren't allowed to pick them up. You leave them there for these widows and some poor to come by. Anyway, so he tells her to stay, and he also tells her whenever she gets thirsty, go up to the reapers and ask them for a drink. You have special privileges. And so he invites her out to the snack shop almost immediately. All right, the first day, Ruth comes home, verse 19, chapter 2, verse 19. Her mother-in-law said to her, Where hast thou gleaned today, and where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, The man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. Now, yeah, I think she's matchmaking here already. But I think more than that even, she is recognizing that the Lord has not forgotten them. God didn't forget about us. The man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen. Now, that is a direct reference to marriage. She's not just saying, oh, he's our relative. I'm glad we know him. She's saying, wait a second. He's a kinsman. And Ruth probably said, what in the world has that got to do with it, All I care about is he got us, he gave, took real good care of me out on the field today. Ruth the Moabitess said, He said unto me also, Thou shalt keep fast by my young men until they have ended all my harvest. Now, part of the reason he told her to stay close to his young reapers was so that she could get the food, but also so that she'd be protected. It was very common, evidently, that these women might be taken advantage of, being out here by themselves, no protector, and so they might be taken advantage of. Verse 22, Naomi said to Ruth her daughter, It is good, my daughter, that thou go out with his maidens, that they meet thee not in any other field. So she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz to glean to the end of barley harvest and of wheat harvest, and dwelt with her mother-in-law. Ruth reaping the grain here. All right, chapter 3 then, we see Ruth requesting. Ruth requesting. What does she request? She requests a place of rest. It's her job. Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Naomi, her mother-in-law, chapter 3, verse 1, said to her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? And now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Wash thyself, therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee, get thee down to the floor, make thyself known but make not thyself known unto the man until he shall have done eating and drinking. And it shall be when he lieth down that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie, and thou shalt go in and uncover his feet, and lay thee down, and he will tell thee what thou shalt do. Isn't that romantic? No, it's not. She said unto her, All that thou sayest unto me I will do. And she went down to the floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. Boy, this is weird. I never heard of any customs like this in Moab. Women being this bold. I thought in this new land of this new God that women might not be so bold. I'll get to explain that in a second. Verse 7, when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of corn. And she came softly and uncovered his feet and laid her down. By the way, this fits with what is going on in the land, possibly with Midianites. He's having to protect his grain. He's having to sleep by the grain. And this is not unusual that the owner would have to sleep out there for days, weeks, to protect his food. And so here comes Ruth, and she did what she was told. She uncovered his feet and laid her down and pulled his robe, bottom of his robe, over her feet. He woke up at midnight. The man was afraid and turned himself. Hey, who's here? Behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, who art thou? It was dark. She answered, I am Ruth, thine handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. Thou art a near kinsman. Okay, Ruth requesting. What is she requesting? She is expected. It's her job as the widow to ask her nearest kinsman to marry her. It's her job to literally say to the nearest kinsman, perform your duty as a nearest kinsman. Yes, in some circles, some ways it might be a little romantic, but actually I think it'd be very awkward. Very, very awkward for the woman, in this case Ruth, to have to go to her nearest kinsman and say, it's your job as the nearest kinsman to marry me. Snap to it. Let's go. Get this thing moving. No, I'm kidding. Now, if she's an old woman and, she's lost most of her teeth, I'm just saying it might not be nearly as easy. But she's a young woman. I shouldn't say she lost all her teeth. She's just an older woman. Anyway, the point is that Boaz, of course, he's attracted to this young woman, but what if he wasn't? He's still required to do his job as a kinsman redeemer, if he's asked to. You talk about awkward. Now, why the spreading of the skirt? Isn't that a little kind of breaking the 6-inch rule there? It's very symbolic. Of what?
Maybe him taking care of her, bringing her under his care.
Sure, absolutely. That's exactly what it is. It's him symbolically bringing her under his care. She didn't just pick up the skirt and stick her feet in there and cover him up herself. She laid down next to him at his feet, and she said, when he woke up, spread your skirt over my feet. And he did. So her request is literally that he perform his duty as a nearest kinsman. Yes, I said, her request was that he marry her. But really, to put it more accurately, she's requesting that he do his duty. The duty was that it was his duty to marry the nearest kinsman, because she had lost her husband and didn't have any children. And under Jewish law, the nearest kinsman could be asked to marry that wife and to raise up children to that kinsman who had died, and then the family the property would remain in that family line, and the kinsman wouldn't get it. Well, in this situation, this is a perfect situation for both sides. Boaz is single. What if he was married? If Boaz is already married, then he's still required to raise up a child to his kinsman who had died, but he wouldn't get any of it. Well, now he's single. He's going to marry her and raise up a child in his brother's name, but it's going to be their property anyway, and their children anyway, because he has no other children to split it with. So it's a perfect situation. Well, almost perfect, right? What's the problem? There's another nearer kinsman. And at first, Ruth and Naomi didn't know that. And so as soon as Boaz hears this, I think that Boaz was it had already crossed his mind, because he knew right away that he wasn't the nearest kinsman to them. I don't know, that just to me says he had already kind of thought about it. That if she came to him and asked, that he would have to say, I'm not the nearest kinsman. Because it came out, instantly came out of his mouth. I'm not. It's not me. So, do I need to explain that? Let me just summarize it this way. According to Hebrew law, Ruth was entitled to call upon her nearest of kin to fulfill the various duties of a kinsman redeemer. By this course of action, Ruth was doing just this, and Boaz understood her request completely. So, what does he do? Chapter 3, verse 12, verse 11. Actually, verse 10. He said, "Blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter." Sounds real romantic, doesn't it? My daughter. "For thou hast shown more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as thou followest not young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, fear not." See here again, another indication he's not a young man. You didn't go after the young guys. It was never, in this situation, it was never the kinsman's job to go seeking the widow. It was the opposite. It wasn't the kinsman's job. It wasn't Boaz's job to go to Ruth and say, I want to marry you because you need to let me fulfill the responsibility of a kinsman redeemer. No. It was her job to come and request it of him. It's not really romantic. So, we'll go on to verse 11. "And now, my daughter, fear not. I will do to thee all that thou requirest, for all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. And now it is true that I am thy near kinsman, howbeit there is a kinsman nearer than I." Now, Boaz definitely was interested, but he knew that there was a problem. But he said, I'm going to take care of this as soon as the morning comes. Verse 15. "Also he said, Bring the veil that thou hast upon thee, and hold it. And she held it. He measured 6 measures of barley, laid it on her, and she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, Who art thou, my daughter? And she told her all that the man had done to her. And she said, These 6 measures of barley gave he me, for he said to me, Go not empty to thy mother-in-law. Then said she, Sit still, my daughter, until I know how the matter will fall, for the man will not be in rest until he have finished the thing this day." I know Boaz. He's going to work on this right away. Okay, so Boaz is going to go about the business of organizing this responsibility of the kinsman redeemer. And that brings us to chapter 4, Ruth redeemed. Ruth redeemed. Boaz goes down to the city gates of Bethlehem and calls a council meeting. All the elders of the city are there. Who is the nearer kinsman? We don't know for sure. Probably he was a brother to Elimelech. And I don't believe the Bible ever tells us the clear connection as far as how Boaz was related to him. I don't believe so. Anyway, so this old man, he's an old man. Verse 3. "He said unto the kinsman, Naomi that is come again out of the country of Moab selleth a parcel of land which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise thee, saying, Buy it before the inhabitants, for the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if you're not going to redeem it, then tell me that I may know. For there is none to redeem it beside thee, and I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. Sounds great to me. I'll take that land. I got the money. I'll buy it. Then said Boaz, that's not all of the deal. Part of the deal also is, and everybody understood this, by the way. Everybody understood that the nature of the kinsman redeemer. It was much more than just a marriage. We always think of it in the terms of a person. But the kinsman redeemer was responsible for all of the property of that deceased, and that included, in some cases, a woman, but often included just land and possessions. Okay, so let's see here. So can you imagine Boaz as soon as he hears those words? He said, I will redeem it. And Boaz, come on now. Now, verse 5. Then said Boaz, what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. And the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Redeem thou thy right to thyself, my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. And he didn't just come out and say, I can't do that. He probably said, oh man, if I do that, then this will happen. I'm going to mar my own inheritance. You know what, Boaz? I'm not interested. I'm already happy with what I have. My sons are already dividing up the property and so on of their inheritance from me. I don't want to mess that up. I don't want to split that any more ways. Because obviously there's more to it than just their side of it. It's also our side and that side of the family. I don't want to mar my inheritance, for I cannot redeem it. And at that point, Boaz has a right to buy that property and to redeem Ruth. And in that case, of course, to marry her. Verse number 7. No, I'm sorry. Verse 9. Boaz said unto the elders and to all the people, ye are witnesses today that I have bought all that was Elimelech's, all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's, of the hand of Naomi. That's not a mistake. He bought it from Naomi. And he also bought it from Ruth. But if you marry, you don't have to pay her anything for it. See, earlier in the passage, he said, you have to buy it from the hand of Naomi. Verse 3. He said in the kinsman, Naomi selleth a parcel of land which was our brother Elimelech's. Okay, so Naomi, you're going to have to buy it from Naomi. Then said Boaz, verse 5, what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess. And so now, in verse 9, he says, I'm going to buy everything from Naomi. Now, what does that do for Naomi? She's set for life. What does that do for Ruth? She's set for life. And what does it do for Boaz? He's set for life, right? His life is over. He's getting married. No, I'm kidding. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, and the name of the dead be not cut off from his brethren from the gate of his place. Ye are witnesses this day. Now, not very romantic, but he bought her. He signed. These are all witnesses of a contract. By the way, marriage is a contract. It's a set of promises. In some countries, it involves 20 sheep and 25 pigs and stuff like that. No, not in our country, thankfully, because I didn't have any pigs to give to my father-in-law. I could have bought some, but anyway. But marriage is a contract. You enter into a contract. Divorce is a breaking of a holy seal of that contract. Anyway, so, but the bottom line is he purchased his wife. He purchased the land from Naomi. And everybody recognized that. And they give their blessing. Verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife. The Lord gave her a conception. She bare a son, and his name was Obed. He shall be unto thee store of life, of thy life, and so on. All right, verse 18. These are the generations of Pharez. Pharez begat Hezron. Hezron begat Ram. Ram begat Amminadab. Amminadab begat Nahshon. Nahshon begat Salmon. Salmon begat Boaz and Obed and Jesse and David. 1 Chronicles chapter 2. 1 Chronicles chapter 2 is another, I was calling them the begats. Another genealogy. 1 Chronicles chapter 2 and verse number 4. Go back to verse 3. The sons of Judah, Onan, and Shelah, which three were born unto him of the daughter of Shua the Canaanitess, and all three of them were killed. The firstborn of Judah, was evil in the sight of the Lord, and he slew him. And Tamar, his daughter-in-law, bare him Pharez and Zerah. Remember that story? Genesis chapter 38. Judah had two sons of his own daughter-in-law. Thought she was a prostitute, and she ended up being his own daughter-in-law. Well, one of those sons is Pharez, and he would be in the line that leads directly to King David. From Ruth chapter 4, we see that. Pharez begat Hezron, Ram, Amminadab, Nahshon, Salmon, probably one of the spies. Married Rahab, begat Boaz, begat Obed, begat Jesse, begat David. Okay? All right, so this is, I think, a great example of the grace of God. You see some pretty bad people in there, as far as from bad situations. Pharez, you see Salmon marrying Rahab. Rahab was in a bad situation at one time. And Ruth, a Moabite, a Gentile, a heathen, getting saved and being brought into this family line. And that brings us then to Jesse and David. Okay, so a great story. Now, remember again, the purpose of the story is not to tell us a love story. There's not really that much of a love story in here, other than, they did, I think, love each other, and he saw her, and he was, she appealed to him right away and so on, to become his wife. But the bottom line is, it's a story of the providence of God and the demonstration of the kinsman redeemer. So, a great, great story. If you want to know more about the story of Ruth, check out some sermons by Pastor Love, and he can help you with that. All right, you're dismissed.